Okay, last time we finished the first subsection of chapter 5 called the nature of the centers, where we explored this progressive set of symbols as they apply to the increased activity of the chakras. These symbols are used universally for all different purposes, but DK in this section applies them specifically to the activity of the chakras. We began our last session with the stage of chakric unfoldment represented by the circle with a cross. At this stage, the heat and light of the central point grows in intensity. Both the circle and the cross increase their rotational speed, and the undulating activity of the petals or spokes becomes more active. DK tells us that this represents a stage where one is nearing the probationary path, which is characterized by mental polarity, and thus has been reached by only a small percentage of humanity. This stage constitutes one of the primary goals of our fifth or Aryan root race. Perhaps it was for this reason, that is, its relevance to humanity's growth at this time, that Carl Jung often used this symbol in his paintings. We then took a look at the swastika, which represents the next stage where, quote, the center becomes fourth dimensional. The inner rotating cross begins to turn upon its axis and to drive the flaming periphery to all sides, so that the center is better described as a sphere of fire than as a wheel. This activity eventually initiates the, quote, fire that burneth up the whole, which burns away the etheric webs that form a protective barrier between the centers, leading eventually to the shattering and dissipation of the causal body at the fourth and fifth initiations. We spent the rest of the last session analyzing two old commentaries. The first, stanza 1 of the Treatise on Cosmic Fire version of the stanzas of Zahn. The second, a related stanza that describes the merging of form with spirit, or the circle of the moving with the unmoving. DK's placement of these two old commentaries at this point, right at the end of the chapter on the nature of the centers, suggests that they are relevant to this unfolding of the centers, even though it seems, especially this first stanza, is kind of a movable feast and can apply at many different levels, even cosmic levels, of the process of integrating energies and then burning up the system that allowed for those energies to develop. So we're not going to review this analysis. If you're interested, check out our last session, TCF episode 36 on Makara or YouTube. We get into it in great detail. So next up, we start a new section of this chapter called The Centers in Connection with the Rays. Could we get a reader, please?
Ann Parker, would you like to read?
Sure. We take up our second point in the consideration of the centers. The centers in connection with the rays. This will give us a large range of subject to be dealt with and much food for thought, surmise, and wise conjecture. All that is here stated is given simply as basic or foundation facts upon which may be erected a structure of conjecture and of logical reasoning, employing the imagination and thereby effecting two things. These are an ability to expand our mental concept and to build the antakarana, or that bridge which all who seek to function in the Buddhic vehicle must build between higher and lower mind. Hence the necessity for the use of the imagination, which is the astral equivalent to mental discrimination, and its ultimate transmutation into intuition.
Thank you, Anne. So, after an introductory paragraph, which suggests that the centers in connection with the rays are a fertile ground for, quote, conjecture and logical reasoning employing the imagination, DK says, referring to these mental qualities, these give us an ability to expand our mental concept and to build the antaskarana, or that bridge which all who seek to function in the Buddhic vehicle must build between the higher and lower mind. So the projection, just a very, very quick description of the antaskarana. The projection of a thread of awareness, more often called the antakarana, but alternately as here, the antaskarana, from the mental unit to the monastic permanent atom, allows the disciple to reliably access the intuition. If you're interested, there's an extended section on this subject in Raised Initiation, starting on page 482, about 130 pages, something like that, on this process of building the Astakarana. Next, hence the necessity for the use of the imagination, which is the astral equivalent to mental discrimination, and its ultimate transmutation into intuition. So not that many pages from now, DK lists the senses on each of the cosmic physical subplanes. Note that it is, somewhat surprisingly, the higher correspondences to the sense of taste that link imagination, discrimination, and the intuition. In esoteric astrology, DK says simply, the spiritual imagination is the factor of greatest service to man. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please? By the way, thoughts and questions and comments. Always make these webinars more interesting. So anytime you're unclear about something or you have a comment, just jump in, raise your hand, and we'll call on you. Okay, reader, please.
Gordon.
All teachers who have taken pupils in hand for training and who seek to use them in world service follow the method of imparting a fact oft veiled in words and blinded by symbol, and then of leaving the pupil to follow his own deductions. Discrimination is thereby developed, and discrimination is the main method whereby the spirit effects its liberation from the trammels of matter and discerns between illusion and that which is veiled by it. Not much can be here imparted, as the subject, if dealt with at all fully, would convey too much information to those liable to misuse it. As we know, the evolution of the centers is a slow and gradual thing and proceeds in ordered cycles varying according to the ray of the man's monad.
Thank you. Okay, first, all teachers who have taken pupils in hand for training and who seek to use them in world service follow the method of imparting a fact, oft veiled in words and blinded by symbol, and then of leaving the people to follow his own deductions. Interestingly, in Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1, which came out some years later after TCF, DK actually updates this teaching method. Could we get a reader, please?
Arrow. Sorry, I missed you.
I will do it. Yeah. Today, this method as presented in TCF is no longer being used, and this change constitutes one of the modes of training the disciples of the New Age. The modern disciple has to recognize the hint which is related to his point in consciousness and which is to be found in the mass of instruction made available for his use. He has to seek for him, to him, most deeply esoteric statement he encounters in the current teaching. From this isolated hint, he has to abstract the significance. After removing it from its context, later he must learn and profit from its meaning. Dine 3:19.
Discipleship in the New Age, that's what that stands for. So you can see here the shift away from a one-on-one teacher to student orientation, that it's through the teachings as made available, such as the Blue Books or Blavatsky's works, that discipleship is described. Okay, next up, discrimination is thereby developed, and discrimination is the main method whereby the spirit effects its liberation from the trammels of matter and discerns between illusion and that which is veiled by it. So discrimination guides the imagination and thus stimulates the intuition. It's a threefold process. Imagination leads one to discrimination. When in one's, for instance, meditative imagination, one must discriminate in terms of the images and the thought forms that are considered and employed, right? And through this combination of the two, imagination and discrimination, a line, the antaskarana, is gradually leads one to impress from the intuition. So the three are very deeply interconnected. Okay, could we get a reader for this? Because, after all, imagination is within the astral plane, and one has to work through that in order to come under the impress of discrimination. So could we get a reader, please?
Helios.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Yeah. We are told that power is grown or developed in silence, and only he who can find a center of peace within his head, where the paths of the bodily forces and the spiritual inflowing tides meet, can rightly practice true discrimination and that dispassion which brings the controlled astral and mental bodies under the guidance of the soul. Then he can understand the significance of the vibrating pulse and achieve that point of equilibrium, which is the result of the interaction and vibration.
So we can look at those poles as, soul and personality, or as higher mental plane and the three worlds of human endeavor. And that achievement of equilibrium is what allows that state of what he calls a center of peace within the head, where one can then come into the true ability to discriminate. I saw a hand. Yes, let's see here who we have.
Well,
Tom?
it's me again. I think that I raised the hand because I read the passage that
Oh,
is just hit me like right into the target. And I have a question exactly about those vibrating poles.
yeah.
Can you expand on where and what the function of the poles and where are they in the system? Just maybe whatever you briefly
Well,
can.
it's interesting because right now I'm writing a presentation for the upcoming conference on the law of magnetic impulse, which is also called the law of polar union. And it's all about this bringing together all the pairs of opposites and finding that central point, which is really the third point, the top point of an equilateral triangle, that it's not the center point between the quote unquote vibrating poles, but rather that point that transcends them, um, and is thus able to experience this point of equilibrium. So it's not like finding the exact midpoint. It's in the upward extension of that midpoint, which is a stage of consciousness that's described here as a center of peace within the head, that then allows a transcendent perspective on all pairs of opposites. The ultimate pair of opposites, at least for a human being in incarnation, is soul and personality. And so when you find in incarnation, that place of equanimity between the two, then the channel opens, and you can flood the personality with the soul influence. There's really a lot that can be said about this. Interaction, interplay, interconnection, um, infusion, all of this is made possible by finding this central point.
And your work on that you just described will be in a conference. Will be information on what day and which conference it is?
Yeah, rheology. It'll be the rheology conference. So the first day of the rheology, and then on the second day, the other thing, that the law of polar union or of magnetic impulse has two names.
Okay, thank you.
Also governs the unfolding of the love petals of the egoic lotus, which is in that same position, which is this place where discrimination and the intuition is found. And so I'm going to do a presentation on how that law relates to the unfolding of the second tier petals of the egoic lotus. So yeah, that'll be on those 2 days of the rheology conference.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think Tom had his hand up.
Oh, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I have a problem with this imagination. I can't really fit it in. So because I have just been reading the glamour book, which says that the emotional world is full of glamour, and when you use imagination, you are in that. So I can understand the discrimination part, but how do you see the role of imagination in this work?
Well, the imagination has to be guided by mind. And so it's, the astral plane is negatively polarized. If you just are swimming around on the astral plane, and you see this kind of stuff all the time, like in artwork, where, and music and, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of expression where you see it's just astral, and there's no guiding, spiritual guiding force. So for the disciple, that imagination, you reach out for guidance in your imagination, visual quote, slash visualization, uh, for spiritual guidance. And that brings in this quality of discrimination, even though you won't necessarily know exactly how you're discriminating. The quality of imagination begins to right itself and move towards um, the higher subplanes of the astral plane, and it becomes truer as a reflection of the higher realities, right? But you're right. Left on its own, the imagination is just a journey through astrality.
Yeah, and what I read from the glamour is that you dissolve these astral glamours by inviting the causal plane energy, which is not imagination. So this why this function is a little bit strange to. I understand what you say. I agree that you have to use the discrimination, but if you just use the words imagination as such, it leads to
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, DK says this is the most effective gift to humankind, the imagination. So, sometimes you have to use these terms in context of what's being written about, and certainly imagination can take you deeper and deeper into glamour. People do it all the time. But directed use of imagination can lead one out of astrality because it links up with its higher counterpart, discrimination. And eventually that is the guiding principle. And then it's really just visualization of what you could say discriminative subject matter. Okay, anyone else? All right. So, so we tend to define discrimination in terms of its lower mind usage, its effect on our feeling nature. This is like, everyday English use of the term discrimination. Lower mind, its effect on our feeling nature, and a means of interpreting our sensory perception, right? Obviously, for example, through the senses of discrimination, you can be aware of the fact that a Fuji apple looks, feels, and tastes different. I'm using taste because that's the line, from a gala or a Honeycrisp apple. Or we notice that a friend's mood seems, this is discrimination, seems different today than yesterday. But when employed by higher mind, it demonstrates as something altogether different, as we discover in one of DK's most definitive statements on the nature of discrimination. I think this is a very important passage. So even though it's a little long, let's go ahead and read it. Can we get a reader, please?
Janet.
Disciple in training for these higher realizations is urged to practice faculty of discrimination. You've been so urged. The initial and normal interpretation and immediate effect of the practice is to teach the disciple to distinguish between the pairs opposite. Yet, just as the disciple in his early training discovers that the discriminating process has not to do with the choice between recognized evil, so-called, and recognized good, but concerns the more subtle pairs of opposite, such as right and wrong silences, right and wrong speech, right understanding and right indifference, and their opposites. So the man who is reacting to these higher laws discovers that the discrimination to be shown is again still more subtle and is for the bulk of the aspirant in today's world still a meaningless objective. This type of discrimination is not even being evoked. It is that which must be shown in retaliation, no, relation to the following subtle context. Sorry about
Yeah, that should be B. That must
Yeah,
be
I think,
shown. And yeah, go ahead.
okay, okay. Number one, the vibration of the soul itself. Two, the vibration of the inner group in which he is, even if unconsciously affiliated. Three, the vibration of the master as the focal point of the group. His ray vibration, four, as sensed via his soul and the master. Five, the vibration resulting from the interplay between his soul and his personality. Six, the three different vibrations of his vital body, his emotional body, and the mind. Seven, the vibration of the groups or the group with which he must work upon the outer plane. Eight, the soul vibration of other people whom he contacts. Nine, the vibration of such a group as a new group of world servers. These are only some instances of the type of discriminations which are required. These he will learn to distinguish instinctively when he is further developed. I would like to remind you that it is when we try to discriminate entirely mentally that the problem seems insuperable. When the rule of the soul and the recognition of the soul have been firmly established, these different recognitions become instinctual reactions.
Thank you. So, DK is always raising the bar in terms of, uh, what this process involves. So initially, we learned to distinguish between the pairs of opposites. That's using both our senses, or I should say, our senses, our astrality, our feeling quality, as well as lower mind. And we can hone this to a very subtle level. He gives some examples here: right and wrong silences. You can just, in right and wrong speech, you have a sense of when, just from the vibratory quality of whether it's a right or wrong, in context, speech or silence or whatever, right? And he gives more examples here. But then he introduces this whole other level of the ability to distinguish or discriminate between these vibratory qualities. So to tell the difference between one's own soul and, for instance, the vibration of the inner group which you belong to. I mean, that's, and then that as distinct from the vibration of the master, of his ray vibration. I mean, these are incredibly subtle. And then he gives us the key in this last paragraph where he says, if you're trying to do this at mental levels, it seems insuperable. There's no chance that you're going to make these distinctions through the usual method of discrimination. It's just not going to happen. The ability is just not inherent in the lower mind. And that it's through the soul and recognition of the soul that this ability comes in. And at that point, it literally becomes instinctual. You don't have to think about it. One can just experience these different qualities of vibration. So I thought this was really, raises the ceiling on the nature of discrimination and shows why it really is a higher mental function. Okay, back to the text, where DK addresses the subject of the centers and the rays. Quote, not much can be here imparted, as the subject, if dealt with at all fully, would convey too much information to those liable to misuse it. As we know, the evolution of the centers is a slow and gradual thing and proceeds in ordered cycles, varying according to the ray of a man's monad. So he's back to talking about the centers. And this is just the latest in a series of statements on the danger of any kind of artificial means that would result in the premature arousal of the Kundalini. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please? Thoughts or questions on any of this? Jump in if you have them.
Yeah, one from Magda, and then Janet, I think, has a question. She wrote, this seems to connect with the concept of DK anticipating new ways of integration, infusion, etc., through any media productions or any modern communicating vehicle. More and more as initiations reach beyond the third one and vibrations get refined toward ever higher mental planes.
Yeah, good comment. Thank you. Okay, questions?
Janet, do you have a question?
Yeah. Can I see the page that I read again? I was just thinking about as you're going through these stages, don't you get kind of a hint that it's like coming from the soul, or it's coming from this point or that point?
Well, if you do,
Before it's
kudos to you.
instinctual.
If you do, kudos to you. If you can, isolate and determine the nature of these types of vibrations, that suggests soul contact, soul awareness, because that's the only place it comes from. It's higher in its ability. So you're asking me, were you just saying, don't you have this experience? Is that what you were saying?
Well, you can have different types of experiences where you might feel, oh, my soul's reminding me of this, or whatever. Or if you're in a group where you've contacted the master for meditation, things can come through there. You know what I'm saying? And then eventually it does become instinctual, but you don't know. You don't have to really know where it's from other than its higher plane.
Well, that's the level that I'm at, where I have a sense that I'm being impressed by a very distinct and high quality of vibration. But my ability to discriminate the nature of that vibration is really in its infancy. I admit it. And so I'm at this point just satisfied with the fact that I have an experience of higher vibration, and I feel the definite impress. I had a spiritual teacher, whose presence just brought in this very powerful vibration, and it was very specific and very powerful. So that's how I learned to recognize first of all, just the existence of this higher quality of vibration. And that sensitized me throughout my life to the presence of this vibration. But as I said, I'm still in baby steps in terms of determining what's described here.
And
Yeah.
I like that you mentioned reflection as far as your conference when you're going to go into this in more detail. Because it is upon reflection that you can get at least a glimpse for the future.
Yeah.
If you know how it happened, then you might see it when it's coming the next time.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Anyone else? I see hands.
Yeah, Magda.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
My question, since I had the same experience as you with one master that transmits the opening and the vibration progressively, I wonder if it's possible that this happens also without the presence of the presence, either physical or non-physical, of a master.
Yeah, I think, and what he's talking about here is to be able to distinguish the difference. I imagine it's even, for someone who's truly soul infused, just like we can tell the difference between Bob and Jane, who live next door. You can tell the difference between the vibration of two different masters. It's just as obvious as can be, because that subtlety of influence, the reception of that subtlety of influence has been developed, and you can tell because you're alive in that realm. And so you can tell the difference between different masters, you know, um, not just the presence of some master, which is, I would think, the first step. Or even before that first step, before that step, it would be just some presence, just you're feeling a presence and you're not able to determine if it's your soul, or a master or whatever. But you feel that presence. I think this is like at the stage of aspiration, where your spiritual faculties, it's represented pictorially by a babe in a basket sitting on the steps of the temple, right? You haven't developed any abilities yet, but you are committed to being in the temple. And you have this first experience, which is feeling the presence. And then from there, and I imagine according to different ray types and according to one's astrology, you would have this development, because there would be a priority. For the mystic, the priority is just having the experience. For an occultist and for, like fifth ray types, for instance, there would be an immediate focus on, what am I experiencing here? What's the nature of this? What's going on here? So.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. All right. So we read this. Did we read this?
Not today.
Not today. Right. I was just going over it. I have in my notes. Can we get a reader, please?
Kirsten, do you want to read?
Yes. The life of the pilgrim can be, for purposes of discussion, divided into three main periods. One, that period wherein he is under the influence of the personality ray. Two, that wherein he comes under the ray of the ego. Three, that wherein the monadic ray holds sway. The first period is by far the longest and covers the vast progression of the centuries, wherein the activity aspect of the threefold self is being developed. Life after life slips away, during which the aspect of manas or mind is being slowly wrought out, and the human being comes more and more under the control of his intellect, operating through his physical brain. This might be looked upon as corresponding to the period of the first solar system, wherein the third aspect, logoic, that of Brahma, mind or intelligence, was being brought to the point of achievement.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, I see a hand. Carol, go ahead. Are you unmuted?
Sorry. The way I was taught the rays, we didn't use the word the ray of the ego. We did have the personality, the soul, the mind, etc. So what's the ray of the ego following under? Is there a different word for it?
No, it's the same. The ray of the ego and the ray of the soul is the same.
Oh, it's
He
the soul. Thank you. That's all
used
I need to know.
ego with a capital E to represent the soul. That's specific to DK. Blavatsky uses ego in a very different way, so you have to be in context to recognize it. So it's, personality, soul, and monad is what's being described here, right? So these three periods that are described here, I don't have to reread them, are related to the number 777, which is just happens to be the number of our planetary logos, in a very specific way, and to the three halls of ignorance, wherein average humanity functions, and that's the period where he's under the influence of the personality ray. Halls of learning, where the intelligentsia and aspirants are found. That's the beginning of influence from the ray of the ego. And the halls of wisdom, where initiates are found. And at least at the third initiation, the monadic ray begins to be experienced. Where it actually holds sway would be at even higher initiations. Actually, even coming under the influence of the personality ray fully and completely, which DK describes as the first stage, doesn't truly demonstrate until personality integration has been achieved. Before this, it's the ray influence of the sheaths, the physical, astral, and mental, each ruled by different rays, that foster one's growth. It's only when you have, this healing of the cleavages between the sheaths and that personality integration that one truly comes dominantly under a personality integration. But this is a huge topic, and it's dealt with extensively in the Discipleship and the New Age books. The second period, wait a minute, sorry. Yeah, we're talking about the second period here, begins when the integrated personality makes soul contact, unconsciously at first, but which eventually leads to aspiration. We're influenced by the soul way before we know it, before we can definitely say, I have soul connection. The third period begins at the third initiation, when for the first time the initiate becomes consciously aware of the impress of the monad. Sorry, I keep going forward. That's the third period. Next, the first period is by far the longest and covers the vast progression of the centuries, wherein the activity aspect of the threefold self is being developed. Life after life slips away, during which the aspect of manas, or mind, is being slowly wrought out, and the human being comes more and more under the control of his intellect, operating through his physical brain. So we get some idea of the length of time of this first period by considering the fact that all of us individualized either during 1, the moon chain, 2, the Lemurian root race, or 3, the Atlantean root race. DK tells us that the Lemurian individualization took place 21 million years ago. So just for fun, if we divide 21 million years by 70 years, which is probably much more than the average historical lifespan, we get 300,000 lives. But this doesn't allow for time spent out of incarnation. Even if we allow for 100-year average between each incarnation in order to process and integrate each life's lessons, we're still looking at 30,000 lives since the time of individualization in Lemurian times. Less since Atlantean times, and much, much longer for those who were individualized on the moon chain. Of course, these are just guesstimates, but they give us some sense of how long it takes to develop the lower vehicles. By the way, the time spent between incarnation is initially quite brief, all during that Lemurian period. It would be just a few years because the emphasis is laid on outer experience. Then gradually becomes longer as the personality develops. Then when one becomes aligned with the soul and it becomes once again much shorter because the disciple or initiate is needed for service in the outer world. So this, at any rate, we're looking at literally thousands of lifetimes if we individualized either in Lemurian or Atlantean times to develop this third aspect. So we've been around a while doing this work. Okay. Next up.
Or hands up.
Yeah, or hands up. You have hands?
Yeah, Maria Cristina just joined. I thought I was early. I guess I'm late. But hi, and I'm so happy to be here. And I have a question. Is the moon, I thought moon chain and Atlantean, those who came in the moon chain and Atlantean chain are different times?
Oh yeah, very, very different. Maybe you didn't.
The moon chain. So when was the moon chain?
Okay, so the moon chain here. Let me go out of full screen mode here, and find it. See, where am I here? All right, so I'm on slide 37, so I can get back. So we'll go over here. All these 7 rounds moving through 7 globes represent a chain. The previous chain, we can look at 2 chains here. This is the 4th and 5th, but if you just made this the 3rd and 4th, this would then be the moon chain. So, DK tells us that some people individualized on the moon chain. So in this case, you're talking about untold millions and millions of lifetimes ago, because it's right. So
but they incarnated here on this planet at some point along the way.
Right. If we individualized on this planet, let me see. I also have a chart that shows. Yeah, let's go here. So if you individualize on this planet, which is globe D here, that's where we are right now, then you would be looking at the 3rd root race out of 7 of this planet as the Lemurian individualization period. And that's where I developed all those numbers. Now, Atlantis would be some millions of years later, and that was the last group wherein the souls overshadowed the animal man during Atlantean times. Does that make sense?
Yes, but my question is really because I thought moon chainers, if you will, I know they individualized long ago on the moon, but at some point incarnated here. And I thought they incarnated here about the same during Atlantean times.
Oh, yeah, but
They were already individualized, but they had arrived on our Earth, or we arrived, or whoever arrived at that time.
yeah, there were a number of, they're the guides of the race for the most part. Those moon chain individuals, and they incarnated in Atlantis as
Okay.
as part of the hierarchy to guide the
Oh,
the humanity of that time. Um, and the Atlanteans, it wasn't a monastic race; it was a sentient or feeling race with a lot of psychism. So the guiding of the race took place from members of the hierarchy who certainly would have been, because they're the elders, would have individualized on the moon chain,
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for your question, because uh, you know, if you don't quite understand it, you can bet there's many more here that don't quite understand it. So it's always good to have these clarifications. Okay, let's see here. So just finding my place, folks. So, this, and I'm reading this now, DK is here talking about the first period of development, might be looked upon as corresponding to the period of the first solar system. He's talking about this first period of humanity, this personality developing period, wherein the third aspect, logoic, that of Brahma, mind or intelligence, was being brought to the point of achievement. So as with the first period of human development, the first solar system was much longer than the second will be, the one we're in now. We might even speculate that the first period of human development is a kind of recapitulation, and that it is the second period of human development that is actually in line with this second solar systemic incarnation. This seems to be verified by the fact that the lower 18 subplanes of the cosmic physical planes, where all early human development takes place, and which relate to the previous solar system, are below the threshold of conscious awareness of the planetary logos in this second ray solar system. Nonetheless, it is the Brahmic aspect leading to monastic development that dominates in both the human and solar systemic first stage. Okay? Next, let's take a look at the long footnote from the Mahatma letters from an Indian master, quote unquote, to AP Senate, which is referenced by this sentence that we just analyzed. Can we get a reader, please, for this first part?
Magda, you want to read?
When the last cycle of man bearing has been completed by that last second.
Hang on, Magda. Can you move closer to your mic or switch your mics or something? Because your sounds like you're way back. There we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
When the last cycle of man bearing has been completed by that last fecund earth, and humanity has reached in a mass that's the stage of a Buddhahood and passed out to the objective existence into the mystery of nirvana, then strikes the hour. The seen becomes the unseen, the concrete resumes its pre-cyclic state of atomic distribution. But the deed worlds left behind in the unsweeping impulse do not continue dead. Motion is the eternal order of things, and affinity or attraction its handmaid of all works. The thrill of life will again reunite the atom, and it will stir again in the inert planet when the time comes. Through all its forces have remained status quo and are now asleep, yet little by little it will, when the hour restrikes, gather for a new cycle of men-bearing maternity and give birth to something still higher as moral and physical types than during the preceding Mahanvantara.
Thank you. So first, when the last cycle of man-bearing has been completed by this last fecund earth, and humanity has reached in a mass the stage of Buddhahood and passed out of the objective existence into the mystery of nirvana, then, quote unquote, strikes the hour. So we can only guess when the, quote, last cycle of man-bearing has been completed by that last fecund earth. We're currently on globe D down here, which happens to be the densest globe of the entire Earth scheme. All 49 globes, this is the densest. Even the very next globe in the round, let alone the next round, will be of an elemental constitution more rarefied than this Earth. But this shift in the density of the elements won't prevent future human races from incarnating, because they too will be elementally more tenuous in their constitution. In other words, each of the elements will have a more tenuous composition. Earth will be less dense than it is on this planet, water less dense, etc. Nonetheless, at some point, DK here tells us, the Earth scheme will reach the time of the, quote, last fecund Earth, the last globe whereon incarnated human life will be possible. So will that be globe D of this fifth round? Globe E of that round? Or maybe even globe D of the sixth round? Since this last fecund globe will mark the stage in which humanity achieves a collective Buddhahood, the final globe on which human incarnation will be possible may even be in a globe on a globe of one of the denser rounds of the next chain of the Earth scheme, rather than on a later round of this chain. We just are not given this information. We can only guess. When is this last fecund globe? Or alternately, does each chain initiate and graduate its own wave of humanity, drawing it forth from the animal kingdom of the previous chain? We've explored this subject at length in the Secret Doctrine webinar series, which details the progression of the life wave through the kingdoms of nature as they progress from round to round. And we get some hints there, but nothing that allows us to determine absolutely when the last fecund Earth will be. The reason I don't place the last fecund Earth in the seventh round, this is here, is because it is possible, even likely, that these globes, the globes that make up this round, won't be fecund as we understand the term, because humanity will have passed beyond the need to incarnate, which DK, and this, or not DK, actually this is these two masters in their letters to AP Senate describes as humanity reaching Buddhahood. So more questions than answers, but at least we're, we have some idea of the questions that are involved in this. Any thoughts or questions about this? Okay.
Well, I can,
Go ahead.
I looked up moon chain
Yeah.
and many of the present advanced humanity individualized on the moon chain and took physical bodies in the earth chain during the fourth root race. That's Atlantean, all right. Thus escaping incarnation during the first 3 rounds and the first 2 races of the 4th round. In the interim, they came under the planetary of another logos or scheme.
Came under.
Developing the attribute of manas. But then it goes on to say that how some will achieve sooner than others. That's all. I've lost that sentence. I'm sorry. I'll be quiet now.
No, that's all right. That was good clarification. So in short, they were needed. They were able to skip the first rounds because they'd already done that work in the moon chain. So they didn't need to go through one,
It
two,
just sounds
three.
like not everybody achieves all at the same time Buddhahood en
Oh,
masse.
absolutely. That's right. Yeah, I mean, we already have one we know of who's achieved Buddhahood in the Buddha, and actually many others who have come up through humanity who have achieved this high stage. But relative to all humanity, just a handful, right? And very likely, I mean, the Christ is an exception because he literally individualized in Lemurian times. But most of these great beings came from the moon chain, individualized, that is to say, on the moon chain. So they got a head start. They started earlier in this process. And incarnated in Atlantis, not because that's where they were in consciousness, but because they were needed to help guide the race. Okay. See a hand? Yes, Carol?
I just missed my notes. So Christ individualized in what times?
My understanding is that he individualized in Lemurian times, that he is a product of this globe. And
Yes.
He was not on the moon. Okay.
well, not as a individualized human being anyway. And he progressed more rapidly than any other human being who individualized in Lemurian times.
Yes.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, so next up, the seen becomes the unseen. Remember, this is not DK. This is this footnote by a master to A.B. Senna. But it's very much first generation theosophy. It reads a lot like Blavatsky reads. So the seen becomes the unseen, and the concrete resumes its pre-cyclic state of atomic distribution. So unseen means that which has its center beyond the current 3 worlds of human endeavor, which is initially the higher monastic and Buddhic planes, the latter onto which the jiva moves at the 4th initiation. The quote, concrete, okay, I can do it. The concrete resumes its pre-cyclic state of atomic distribution, means that the second logos will no longer use the matter of the lower 3 planes of the cosmic physical plane to create the mental, astral, and etheric vehicles, and therefore will no longer employ the 6th creative hierarchy to shape the lower vehicles from the basket of nourishment, which is the 7th creative hierarchy. And thus the concrete or atomic substance of these lower planes will return to and become quiescent within the great reservoir that is this 7th hierarchy, only to be reignited in a later cycle, right? So after the last fecund Earth, when it's no longer necessary for humans to reincarnate in order to achieve their goals, then these two hierarchies will become quiescent until the next cycle, when once again incarnation becomes needed. We have to consider this next part as a whole, because the last phrase gives us the context for the entire passage. So, but the dead worlds left behind, the on-sweeping impulse, do not continue dead. Motion is the eternal order of things, and affinity or attraction its handmaid of all works. The thrill of life will again reunite the atom, and it will stir again in the inert planet when the time comes. Though all its forces have remained status quo and are now asleep, yet little by little it will, when the hour re-strikes, gather for a new cycle of man-bearing maternity and give birth to something still higher as moral and physical types than during the preceding Manvantara. So the term Manvantara is used in different contexts to suggest different cycles of time. Often DK uses the term to describe a period of one globe's activity through its 7 races, as shown here. But because DK references the last fecund Earth, it's actually these masters, I think Manvantara here references a round of 7 globes, as indicated by this quote from EP1. Wait a minute here. Yeah. We have the 4th root race, the 4th planetary chain, the 4th planet in the chain, and the 4th planetary Manvantara. So just from this list, we can see that what he's calling a Manvantara is a round of 7 globes. Why does this matter? By process of elimination, the term Manvantara here means a round. So taking this as our premise, the quote, dead worlds left behind in the on-sweeping impulse are the globes, which are one by one abandoned as the life wave progresses from one globe to the next. Any thoughts or questions about this? It takes a while to understand this series of septenary, 7 root races on each appearing on each of 7 globes, which each appear in 7 chains through a progression of time determined by 7 different rounds. Takes a while.
I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Because when one talks of a globe, we're not necessarily talking physical.
Well, it's physical at some level. So
Etheric, okay, so when there's only F and G left, what is A, B, C, D, and E doing? They're not mineral. It's not mineral substance. It's an etheric.
they're in Palaya. Their life wave has stopped. They still exist. They are holding the matrix so that the life wave can transfer to the next globe.
Okay.
We know
They're
that
permanent atoms.
they're like permanent atoms in that sense, yeah. But we also know that because DK tells us that the moon is the globe D of the moon chain, and yet it is in the sky. It's prolaic, but its mineral element is still extant. It's there, right? But there's no life aspect or life activity, which is represents all the other, in other words, the life wave no longer inhabits that globe D from the previous chain, right? So the globes change from chain to chain, right? They're altogether new or different from chain to chain, but within a chain, there's a progression 7 times through the 7 globes.
They reincarnate.
Yeah, they do. They reincarnate. Yeah, and yet there are 7 globes. There are 7 lives within a chain, and the life wave moves from globe to globe. The reincarnation of a globe occurs when you're moving from, let's see, let me go back here. When you're moving from one round to the next.
Right.
Here it is. So all the globes in the 5th chain are different. They're, you could say, new reincarnations of the globes of the 4th chain at a higher vibratory level, right? But they are different globes, whereas the 7 globes of any given chain exist concurrently, but the life wave passes through them. And that life wave is described by the progression of the rounds. It takes a while to get it absolutely and completely. But yeah, that's the latest installment on this.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Hang on a sec.
There's a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it possible that one or more sub-races get skipped in order to pass on towards the next Earth incarnation?
I don't think so. I think races can fail, quote unquote, fail. That is, end prematurely. But you're not going to have like the first race, sub-race skip to the 3rd. You're not going to have that kind of a skip. But it can just end like the Atlantean ended, I think, at the 4th sub-race, at the 4th or 5th sub-race of the Atlantean. My guess is that it was at the 5th sub-race that the Dark Brotherhood pulled all the stops to end it, because 5 is always associated with monastic development, and they wanted to stop the Atlantean from moving into that stage of development. And so that's when the floods came, and that race had to be destroyed. And then reinvented as the 5th root race, the Aryan root race, which has as its goal and purpose development of manas. And as we talked about before the webinar started, it too may fail because of, and it's predicted that that the previous destruction came through water, and the next destruction will come through fire. And it may be that, that could either be global warming or, God forbid, a nuclear holocaust where that destruction would happen. But you can't stop humanity. Even if the 5th root race is destroyed, the seeds, the holy ones, will reconstitute humanity in the 6th root race, when the earth again is able to house the life impulse. Okay.
Yes. I just wish to make sure I understand correctly your answer. So you mean that that yes, to my question, your answer is yes, as it already happened on Atlantis. The last two, after the fifth subrace, humanity failed. So we passed on with the seeds, of course, brought on by the high masters. We went on to the Aryan root race. And is this did this happen just the same, like more or less toward the fifth subrace on the Lemurian root race too? Did it happen the same pattern?
Fourth or fifth, that seems to be the breaking point, and the reason being that it begins the upward. It begins the upward
Yeah.
trending of humanity. It's the last three subraces are subjective and more synthetic. The fifth being the first, because it's through the fifth that we're able to be soul infused, truly soul connected and soul infused. It's that monastic development that leads to that. So it's considered the first of the last synthetic three root races. And so often that seems to be the dividing point where the race fails.
And may I ask then, why in the cosmological schemes of Blavatsky, Steiner, we mentioned 7 subraces for all root races? If all big races, all root races are doomed to fail toward the 5th subrace. It's maybe a silly question, but I'm curious.
You know, it's really beyond my pay grade to be able to answer that, you know, but I would say that by the time we get to the 6th subrace, the 6th root race, that we will have come out of that danger, because there's the 6th subrace will be naturally in contact with the soul, just from the get-go. You know, that will be the nature of the development through even the sixth subrace of this root race, that will be greatly increased, this soul contact. And by the 6th root race, that will be the nature of the root race. So there wouldn't really be any built-in mechanism for failure, as I see it. So I don't think it will continue that way. I think it's these most dense races, 3, 4, and 5, that are most subject to failure, because they are most attracted into the form aspect. They're most influenced by the form aspect.
I have to say, regardless if we succeed or fail, we move ahead.
Oh, without question.
And
you can't.
and we might not fail. We might enable the externalization of hierarchy instead.
Might happen. You know, I mean, the entire purpose of the 1925 conclave of masters was to forestall this failure. You know, the new group of world servers was set up to act as a conduit between humanity and the hierarchy, all with the idea that we would be able to lift our focus up out of the form aspect, and all the ways that manifests in society, and therefore prepare truly for this manifestation of the hierarchy. The big question is, did we succeed? You know, is it, there will be a 2025 conclave, but will that institute this new age that leads to the return of the Christ, or will this have been delayed because of the lack of preparation? It's just an open question. Okay.
my group has been wanting to know, and Victoria here badly, whether or not the people on the moon chain destroyed themselves. That's the impression we've had?
Uh, there's almost nothing specifically written about the activities that took place on the moon chain. We can get a good idea of the energies that were present, but to my knowledge, DK never makes that statement. Now, there may have been other esotericists, who have speculated on the activity of the moon chain, but to my knowledge, DK never makes the statement that you just made, that because an entire chain is not going to have destroyed itself. You
We
would
heard they were transported here. Is that a rumor?
Well, that's the natural evolution, that the moon chain life was transported globe by globe to this chain. That's the natural progression of things. It doesn't mean that you're bailing out of a sinking ship. It means that there could and probably were, since there have been in our chain, root races that failed in the moon chain, but it wouldn't have been the failure of an entire chain or even of an entire globe. It would have been specific root races that failed at that time, only to be only for the next wave to be carried on by the following root race. You can't stop the progress of humanity, even though you can delay it. And that's what a failure root race represents. So those globes would have transferred their life wave to this chain, but at a higher octave and for the different purposes of development. And and the process continues just as it will when the life wave passes from these 7 globes in this chain to the next chain's 7 globes. That can't be stopped. You can have temporary
a temporary retardation, he says.
temporary retardation. That's a delay. That's the Dark Brotherhood. That's their agenda, to delay. They're not going to win the game. It's only temporary delays that they can institute, and that's what the hierarchy works to avoid. And we're, I would say, in a pitched battle at this point for the survival of the 5th root race. Okay.
Yeah, Barbara and Tom. So Tom?
Yeah, I just want to add that I was just reading the Powell solar system, and he interestingly says, based on the theosophical teaching, that on every 5th race, 5th round, 5th subrace, there's a mini doomsday. So that might have a kind of link to this, that also these catastrophes and failures are somehow programmed in the system. I don't know whether it's in the DK's teaching.
Where's that?
Powell solar system, based on Besant
Where's
and
that quote
Leibniz.
from, Tom?
What?
Where's that quote from?
That's from Powell, A.E. Powell solar system.
I didn't really understand that. Is it DK teaching?
No. It's Powell solar system is the name of the book.
Oh, okay.
Where it's a compilation from Besant and Leibniz's teaching. It's very interesting, and also he there enumerates that there are 7 subrays, even though the destructions and crises. But so the Atlantean was destroyed, but there were the Chinese and others that were then numerated as the subraces of the 4th. So the 777 goes on, but he takes a he puts forward this kind of mini doomsday system.
It makes sense because the first stage of the development of the monastic principle, which always happens in the fifth subrace, fifth root race, right?
Yeah.
The first stage of that is separated mind. You develop lower mind, which naturally separates one from its source, separates one from, you move from unconscious connection with the soul to development of lower mind and a separation of this of awareness of the connection with soul, but then gradually through mind, one then reconnects because the soul is the son of mind, and so through the development of mind, one then reconnects with the soul. That is a fifth subrace, fifth root race, fifth subrace, even fifth globe process. And so I would think that it is most liable, most likely that disasters would happen at that time.
It's logical, yeah.
Yeah, just from that point of view. Now, I can't speak to, the historical veracity of what that author put forth, but it makes sense. All right. Anyone else? Is there more hands?
Is the life wave a form of Fohat? From Barbara.
Fohat always facilitates the integration of spirit and matter. So you have forms like a globe that is in pralaya that has been the active principle, which is the nature of the merging of spirit and matter, has been withdrawn. So Fohat is called on once again to, there are 7 levels of Fohat, right? To once again integrate spirit and matter. And so it's very much a part of that process of the life wave moving from one form to the next. Yeah, anyone else?
Barbara, did you have something else that you wanted to ask? Saw your mic open.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very helpful. So does Fohat combine with other forces to keep the flow of evolution going? And there's a sub-question, are there permanent atoms that are part of the process?
Well, you could say that, to answer your last question first, that, we are mostly familiar with the permanent atoms that allow for the holding of information, the matrix, you could say, of our 3 lower sheaths, so that when we reincarnate, we pick up where we left off in quality, not in the specific activities of the previous life, but in terms of the quality of the level of development, including the level of evolution of those sheaths, then we pick up where we left off. Well,
I have to tune in here how the permanent atoms kind of blend, like our permanent atoms, the lower ones that hold the physical, emotional, mental, will eventually blend or feed their essence into the higher, the permanent atoms found in the spiritual triad. And as I recall, this process leads to the permanent atom of the planetary logos, who only has one permanent atom. That's from Cosmic Fire. I could look it up. I like those. I don't know. I've done mini studies on permanent atom, and I can say that the planetary logos, by the time you get to that consciousness, apparently carries one.
Well, that would suggest an integration of all the sheaths. When you come to the level where it is all stored in one permanent atom. That means
Absolutely.
you have basically uh, one one level of demonstration of your conscious awareness, rather than multiple levels like we do. But I kind of lost my train of thought on what I was answering before that. But anyway.
I'm trying to figure out how the evolutionary process works. So there's a life wave, but the life wave seems to be picking up certain patterns and blueprints to carry forward. And
Yeah.
so I'm wondering about that process.
Right. Yeah, it's one of those arose by any other name. Pralaya is this place, or is this state where everything is held in situ. All development is held in situ. And that is very much akin to the nature of a permanent atom. So I would think that there's a definite relationship between pralaya and permanent atoms. So I think that all atoms of consciousness, whether a globe, a solar system, human being, or an animal, have permanent atoms, but that they're wildly different in their widely different, I should say, in their specific demonstration, right? So a globe's permanent atoms would include not only that great spiritual Lord who uses the globe as his body manifestation, and representing all those stages of higher consciousness, exemplified by the permanent atoms of the logoic, monadic, and atmabhuti manasic levels, but that also the planetary elemental, which is the literal physical substance of the planet, would also have their permanent atoms more like our permanent atoms, which hold information from the monastic, astral, and physical planes, and that holds or carries the life wave. But something in addition to all that is held in pralaya, which is there is a transition from one octave to the next in terms of when that life wave moves from one stage of consciousness to the next. And so you could say that, well, that holds with our incarnations too. It's ever progressive, so there is a conditioning during pralaya, as well as when we're out of incarnation, which is our form of pralaya, that allows us to reincarnate on a higher turn of the spiral.
Thank you so much. That's really brilliant and very helpful.
Well, good. I fooled somebody else. No, I'm kidding.
So since we're close to the end, I have one more question in chat and another hand. So let's see. Two now questions in chat. So we'll go them quick. Does the Dark Brotherhood develop in parallel with humanity?
In parallel, you could say that that's true. It's actually made up of members of humanity. So, but gosh, there's not much said. There could be old devils, quote unquote, from, for instance, the moon chain that have survived and somehow made the transition. And they would be like, the dark lords of the Dark Brotherhood. But for the most part, it's made up of humanity who has turned resolutely towards the third aspect, to the form side. And you would think then that as a root race develops in its nature, that there would be a parallel development of those members of the Dark brotherhood. Not much is said about those kind of specifics. Okay, anybody else?
And then Magda, if white brothers fail, conclave 2025, decide to retard intervention as it happened on Atlantis, we would be 6,000 years ahead on time for closing time. And then on to the new Jupiter question. Is this work hypothesis senseful?
Yeah, I can't really answer that. What would be the nature of the delay? There's delay in development of consciousness because you've missed the cycle, and then there's also literally the possible destruction of this physical vehicle that we call Earth. Or rendering it uninhabitable, which would have its own form aspect delay. And they're two very different questions, and also degrees. It could just take longer for us to make the transition. So there will be a conclave in 2025, but the actual externalization of the hierarchy may be delayed based on our readiness, because DK gives a very specific list of what must have come into place for that externalization to happen. It's not automatic. And, that could be delayed. Our readiness could be delayed. From a hierarchical point of view, 100 years is nothing. So as we move further into the Aquarian age, there will be members of humanity who resonate with this new vibration, which will incarnate and will be very much a part of bringing us towards those goals of preparing us for the new age, which is more difficult in this cusp of between Pisces and Aquarius. So as we move forward, the very vibration of the cycle itself will help humanity transition. But, if we destroy our habitat, well, that's a big delay, isn't it? Anyone else?
More pain and suffering, but we're in the throes of battle, as you mentioned. And in the dust and din of it, it's hard to really assess because we're not sitting on the hillside over there directing.
Yeah.
So we take a stand, but it seems like the presence of hierarchy comes ever closer. And indeed, by its very presence, substanding, I think is the word he uses, so much of the causes all of this disruption, because the world organizations must give way if there be new. So
You could say that the disaster, the difficulties are hallmarks of our progress from one,
yes.
because there's so much resistance that we have to break through. That's a very positive outlook, but I think it's a very realistic outlook too. These cusps between ages, I think, are always fraught with crisis, because you're shifting from, the sixth ray to the seventh ray, from the third ray to the fourth ray in terms of, the primary energetic demonstration, and this creates crises.
Turn that down.
What was that? I didn't hear.
Something I want to add is that I don't think it's good to get attached to the outcome happening in a linear time frame the way we look at it, because this may sound off, but I'm not entirely sure it was unanimous to forestall. And I think a delay, if certain things were to, in the long term, affect the habitability of the planet, a delay is positive, even though we may think, oh no, we failed our 2025 mission. Overall, if we retain the planet as a good source of the life principle, that we better to delay. And I'm not voting for delay, but
Right. You can't destroy the Buddhic plane, right? If we go out of incarnation, everything on the other side is going to be just fine and totally intact, right? That's where we'll do our work until, those particular tasks that need to be done while in incarnation can be then re-engaged in. But, the idea that you're destroying humanity, that's a very physical plane perspective that just is not relevant to this. Okay, guys, we have to wrap it up here. But I do want to, if you have any other questions, I always like to get through all the questions and comments before we pull the plug. So is there anything else before we stop?
Helios has her hand up. She's had her hand up, so.
Go ahead, Helios.
I'll be quick. It is just because I'm bilingual and I read some materials that is produced by for instance, Blavatsky in Russian language and in English, whatever comes my way. Pralaya is really kind of really got my mind going. It's only because the work of Blavatsky, Proyom or Proyem, it's written in English. It's actually the synonyms. Pralaya and Proyom means, if I would go by dictionary, it's prolapse. But it's more than that. It's like, if you look at this esoterically, it almost means like place of nowhere, place of neutrality, suspension, and
All those things. It depends on your perspective, because
right.
the highest perspective, spirit dominates during pralaya. One is reunited with their spirit aspect, and you're infused for that whole period of pralaya before the work starts again of going through the process that is only possible through
Right.
form life, but
Right.
it's not an empty, suspended place.
Right, it's not empty, and that's why it's relevant to what was being discussed. Where is the those permanent atoms, and where is the suspension? It really does not exist suspension as a place there is nothing happening. It's like in our human language, it's like what you just said.
Yeah.
There is always work being done, so I don't think there is anybody falling behind, and it's a question of the quantum in our human language that we learn, right, about quantum physics, and now we have quantum states, quantum processes, and actually the pralaya, prayom, prolapse. It's not like prolapse, lapse. There's nothing happening there. It's just on a different level, in a different place that we don't know exactly what it is. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Yeah. So, from the human perspective in incarnation, the three lower she's, there's nothing happening. In other words, you can't perceive the nature of life that continues in pralaya, because the ways by which we gauge the life demonstration is just not happening. But if you get on monadic levels, you're immersed in beingness. It's not activity. It's not the third aspect, but you are immersed in spirit, and that's not nothing. That's not emptiness. you
Right,
know,
and maybe it is the permanent atom. Who have seen permanent atom? No one knows what exactly it is. It's just a permanent particle, but it might be particle of spirit, right, or particle of soul. No one,
yeah, I
no
think
one.
it's a matrix of energy
Yeah.
rather than a particle. But anyway, thanks for your comments.
Thank you.